I'm real excited about today. This is the first Sunday of our summer apps, and what that means is we're going to do some things a little bit different starting this summer, throughout the summer. And as we're doing that, I believe that God is going to really help us to understand just how we can apply the message, and that's really it's really all about. You see, God teaches us, and the Word teaches us that it is not just hearers of the Word, but be doers of the Word. And that's really what's on my heart. And that's, as your pastor and is leading this church, one of the things that I've really been focused on is to help us to grow spiritually, each and every one of us. And that is in tune to that. That same idea is in tune to understanding, you know what, we want to be involved. We want to be connected with what God is doing. And so often it's easy, and one of the reasons I think God just put this on my heart for this summer, what we're doing for our summer apps, is that it's easy to sometimes to be passive. We come in with our needs and our desires. God, this is what I want you to speak to me. God, this is what I want you to do. And in so doing, sometimes we just sort of sit back and receive. But I believe that one of the most important things is to interact and see, what is it that God is speaking to me today? And just having that question in your mind helps us understand what we're going to do. So this is the basic formula of why it's a little bit different for this summer, is that you'll see a phone number as we go through this the sermon up on the screens. That is a text, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to be involved in what God is saying to you and in the message this morning. So as you're going along, if you're thinking, well, I want to know more about that, or how does this apply to my life, or what about this, or how does that really work? I want you to text questions, thoughts, or comments to that number, and then a little bit later on, after the message, I'm going to come back and we're going to have our summer app forum where we're going to interact with that. So this is a chance for you not to just sit there and go, okay, good message, Pastor Greg, but say, okay, what is God saying to me, and how does this fit into my life, and where can I apply this? And if you have any of those questions, I want you to text that. Do it right in the middle of the sermon. That's okay. Just make sure all your phones are on silent so that when they don't go off in the middle of it. But you could text your question, text your thoughts, all through the entire sermon to the entire message. And then we're going to talk about those. We're going to see what is it that God's saying to us and how we can apply the message. So that's what we're doing, and just want to give you that heads up in such effect. If you want to go ahead and put that number in your phone so you'll be ready to go, you can do that as well. And just text that, and then we're going to deal with all those questions or anything that comes in, as well as some other things at the second part of everything that's going to go on this morning. Amen? So if I ask you, what time is it? Do you have the time? Do you know the time? Then most people, because today we live in a society that not only has watches, and we've had watches for quite a while, but now if you don't have a watch, you have a phone. And the first thing what's on the top of that phone is the time. So everybody knows the time. They know the time. But I remember not too long ago, if you didn't happen to have a watch on, or when I was growing up, you didn't know the time, so it wouldn't be that unusual maybe someplace to say, hey, do you know the time? You know what time it is? And someone would ask that. That's really rare nowadays, between everything that we have on us, the digital world that we live in. I was tubing down the Rainbow River with some friends yesterday, which was quite an experience. I did survive. But anyway, as I was going down that river, we didn't have a watch, or we didn't have a phone or anything, and I was desperate to know the time, because I want to know, when will this end? I really had a good time. So as we're going down the river and such, I stopped. Fred, do you know the time? And he said, yes, it's 11:30. You got 15 more hours. Oh, I can do this. Hang in. But it's important to know the time. And we're accustomed to knowing the time. But there's a difference between knowing the time and knowing the times. And sometimes we know the time, what time it is, and we know the time, but we're not really aware of what the times are. Ecclesiastes sort of puts it this way and helps us understand. Look with me in chapter 3, verse 1. It says, there's a time for everything, a season for every activity. So there is a time for whatever we want to do. And we understand that. We understand there's a time to do this, and there's a time to do that, and there's a time to go there, there's a time to go out, there's a time to go in. We understand all the times, and the times that we have, and the times that are out there. But here is what's important. Here's the trick. To know the time is one thing. But do you understand that it is one thing to know the time, but do you understand the times that you're in? We understand that there is a time to plant, there's a time to pull down. But a lot of time, even though we understand there's a time for everything, sometimes it's difficult to figure out, well, what time is it? Is it the time to plant, or is it the time to pull down? Which time is the time that we're living in? Jesus was telling a story to a group of people that were gathered around him. They were all gathered around him. And he was talking to them, and he just started out by saying, hey, when you see a cloud that comes out of the west, then you say, hey, it's going to rain today. And everyone understands that because what was in the west was the Mediterranean Sea. So when there were clouds coming out of the Mediterranean Sea, that's the moisture, and everyone knew it was going to rain. When they saw the breeze, when they saw the clouds coming out of the west, they knew it was going to rain. And at the same time, Jesus said, when you see the breeze or you feel the breeze coming out of the south, then you know that it's going to be hot. You know it's going to be really, really warm, because what's in the south was the desert. And so his point was, you have and you understand the times when it's going to rain, when it's going to be hot. You have that down. You understand that. And then he said something that I think surprised everyone. So the disciples are usually standing around going, yeah, Jesus, he's talking, listen to Jesus, and everything like that. But I think every now and then they're going, I have no idea what he's talking about. This is one of those times, because Jesus looked at everybody and he simply said this. He says, you're a bunch of hypocrites. So he just complimented them. He just encouraged them. He just said, hey, you got this down. And then he says, but you're a bunch of hypocrites. And they're looking around going, well, what do we do? We're just standing here listening. And he says, well, you know the times. You know the time of the breeze of this world. But do you know the times of God in your life? Do you understand the breeze of God? You understand the breeze in this world. You understand how things work. And sometimes we get so attuned to this world, to understanding the things that are in this world and how this world works, that we got that down and we miss the very times that we live in. The times of understanding the breeze of God that is meant and is changing when wants to touch who we are and what we're doing. We get that. We understand the world around us. And he said, you understand the breeze of this world, the wind of this world, but you don't understand the breeze of God and the time that you're living in now. Do you know the times? Do you know the times for your family, for your life, for your work? Do you understand the times and the times that you live in? Now, this is Father's Day, and I have a really special Father's Day message that I think God put on my heart. It's not a Father's Day message that delineates all the ways that a father is great, which I think that's good. I think we should have messages like that. I mean, as fathers, there's all kinds of things that we deal with in this society now that should be there. But it's not a Father's Day message that delineates all that. It's not a Father's Day message that is a dissertation of how to be a good father. Although those are good too. I think we ought to have messages on how to be a good father and how to do all those and have those teaching times. It's not that kind of Father's Day message. I think it's a Father's Day message that comes from the very heart of God, that is more of a declaration of how we live and how we think and how we are to respond in the world that we're in today. How are we going to live and respond to everything that's going around us, and how do we live today? So I want to talk about a Father's Day message that's about a declaration of how we are going to respond to the times. There's just one passage I really want to focus on. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 4. And it's Paul, and he's writing to the church at Corinth. And we're going to talk about the church of Corinth just a little bit. But look what it says starting in verse 14. Paul said, I'm writing this not to shame you. I'm writing this to warn you as dear children. Even if you had 10,000 tutors or guardians is what that means in Christ, you do not have many fathers. For in Christ Jesus, I became your spiritual father. I became your father through the gospel. Therefore, I urge you to imitate me. Paul made something that was really profound in the middle of this passage that I think we need to step back, and listen to what he's saying. Not many fathers. Not many fathers. There's a lot of tutors out there. There's a lot of people saying things, but there's not many fathers. You see, I think it's important to understand that a spiritual father knows the times that God is moving. A spiritual father is aware of what's going on. It knows the time. And when I talk about spiritual fathers, I want everyone to understand, I'm not just talking about physical fathers. I'm not just talking about to men. I'm talking about every one of us. There is a sense, there is a metaphorical understanding that we need to become and live as spiritual fathers for a world that is desperate to see the spiritual fathers, because there's not many fathers out there. Now, Paul begins and really focuses on one thing in that first opening line of 1 Corinthians 4. He says this. He says, I'm writing not to shame you. And this word shame means to put down, to actually lower, to say, well, you're not good enough, and you can't do that, and you can't be that. He says, I'm not writing to shame you. I'm writing to admonish you or warn you. I'm writing to understand, and this word admonish literally means to lift up. So he begins by saying this. I'm writing not to put you down. I'm writing to lift you up. I'm writing to encourage you. You see, this is the first thing you need to understand, is that spiritual fathers know the time to reach out to people. Spiritual fathers are aware of the time that they live in. And this is the heart of everything I want to share this morning. You must know and understand, no matter who you are, young, old, male, female, mothers, fathers, whoever you are, you must understand the times that we live in and the time that God has given us here. Jesus is talking to a group and begins of people that are surrounding him and begins to tell them a story. A parable. And he says this, he says, look, if someone comes up to you and takes you and starts to lead you to the magistrate, and the magistrate would be our equivalent of maybe the police. He's the ruler, right? So if someone is taking you to the police because you did something wrong, you've offended them, you cheated them, intentionally, unintentionally, whatever, you've done something wrong to them. And they're taking you to the magistrate, you need to understand something. Look what it says in chapter 12 of Luke, verse 58. It simply says this, you better, on the way, try really hard to be reconciled as you're going on the way, or your adversary, the one that's bringing you, the one that's taking you, will drag you off to the judge. This is what he's saying. Look, if you get to the judge and all of a sudden you realize the judge is going to throw you in debtor's prison until you pay back every penny, it's too late to try to negotiate. It's too late to try to figure out, hey, how can I make this happen? How can I take care of this? Instead, what Jesus says is on the way, as you're going to the magistrate, as you're going, before you get to the judge, you need to turn to that adversary, to the one that is accusing you, the one that you've offended, and say, hey, I'm so sorry. I know that wasn't right. I know I should have done this, or maybe you didn't or didn't do this. How can I fix it? What can I give you? How can I straighten this out? How can I take care of all this? How can I turn this around and so everything is taken care of? And Jesus says, you better do that because you got to know the times. Now's the time to negotiate. Because when you get before the judge, it's too late. When you get before the judge, you can't do it anymore. My daughter loves Survivor, and we have Netflix, and so she watches, or Hulu or whatever, the old Survivors. And there's about, 20 million of them, something like that. They're out there forever, and they're still going. It never dies. It always survives, hence the name. So she watches this, and every now and then I walk by, and all of a sudden I get intrigued by something, and I'm sitting down and watching it. And here's the thing about Survivor. It's before you get to the tribal council where someone gets voted off, you better be negotiating before you get there. Because if you wait, and because they walk up and they sign your name and they kick you out, right? If someone is walking up, you better have negotiated before that. So what they do is they sit and they talk and, they come and say, hey, you're my best friend. Man, I love you. We got the same heart. We got the same attitude. We're on the same team. I'd probably vote for you to win the whole thing if I could. I just want to let you know, we're connected, right? That's what they do. And then they get to the tribal council and betray each other, stab each other in the back. But the point is that you better do that ahead of time, because if you wait and that person is walking to vote and you go, hey, just want to let you know before you vote, I'm your friend. I love you, man. You're awesome. We're a team. It's too late. It's too late. They've already decided. And that's what Jesus is saying. You got to know the times. Spiritual fathers know the time. And they know now's the time to say, not to put down, not to criticize, not to say you're worthless, not to say you're not good enough, not to say you can't do it. A spiritual father say, you know what? I think God can change you. I think this can turn around. I think you don't have to be this way. I'm not making excuses for wrong behavior. God forbid. What I am saying is that today, in this age, at this time, at this grace, we are giving a calling to know the times to say, come on, God can do something in your life. I know you're messed up. I know it's not right. I know you're sort of going backwards, but you can be a spiritual father that lifts up. See, the world tells them, you're broken, you're messed up. You don't need to necessarily tell someone you are messed up. They know it, even if they got a smile and show up to work with a nice coat and tie and they got everything good and they're all going the right, everything's great. They know they're hurting. They know their life is a mess. They know their marriage is about to end. They know their children are like little banshees running around. They know this. So as spiritual fathers, each and every one of us, what is our calling? To know the time. To say, hey, you know what? You don't have to be that way. Hey, I know that God can do something different in your life. To encourage. You see, we hear it, but do we really know the difference between the sinner and the sin? Do we understand the difference? Again, I'm not saying make excuses for people. I'm just saying look at what God has done. And what Jesus is saying is now's the time. Now's the time that we have something to encourage with. We have something to give them. We have something to change them. While you have breath in your life, while you have a place that God has put you where you're surrounded by people that just need that reach. You can do something. You can make a difference in their life. You see, the prodigal son, when he walked up to the father, didn't just walk up to a physical father, although he was. He walked up to a spiritual father. He walked up to a spiritual father that says, I know you are messed up and you are dirty and I can smell you from here. See, it says that he saw him a long distance away before he got there. I think he smelled him before he saw him. Okay, it was not a pretty sight. You wasted all my inheritance. It's out there. It's over. But I see something. I see some hope still there. I see some life still there. I know I'm going to pull you back in. I know somehow God's going to turn this around. You see, the spiritual father saw life there. Do you see life? Do you see hope? Are you speaking that into people around you? Are you believing that? Are you saying somehow, some way? And I know sometimes it's really messed up. Believe me, if you hear even half the stories that I know as a pastor and working with people, man, it's hard out there as far as people trying to live right. But God can change it if you're willing to speak into their life. So as a spiritual father, you not only reach them, but here's something so important. Spiritual fathers know the time to shine. They know the time to live the example, to be an example to those people around them. You see, Paul talks about in that 1 Corinthians 4, in that passage that I read, he said, you have not many fathers. There's a lot of tutors out there, though. These tutors are called guardians, and what they were was a slave that was in part of the house, or a servant, that would be assigned to one of the young children. After they left their mother, there'd be a child assigned, and this tutor was responsible to make sure the child did everything right. In fact, they actually have writings that said that the child was not allowed to leave the house without the tutor. It was their shadow. And they would train the tutors to say, you tell them, don't let him get into this. Don't let him do that. Don't let him be late for school. Don't do this. Make sure she does this. All these things, make sure that this child does right. So the tutor knows the law, knows the rules. And every time they're walking along and all of a sudden the child says, hey, I want to go do that. No. You're not going to do that because the rule is you cannot do that. So the tutors always remind the children of the law, of the rules. But that's not the role of the father. The father lives by example. The father illustrates and shows them how to live and how to behave completely differently than the tutor does. The tutor says, here's the law. And then the father says, here's the life. If the father is with the son or the daughter, and he says, I'm going to do that, then the father can say, you know what, let's try that. I think you're getting old enough now. I think maybe you can do that. I think this is something that you can do. But the tutor couldn't do that because the tutor is not the father. The tutor just says, no, the rule says. No, the rule says. And sometimes, understand what I'm saying, people. We have attitudes that fill the church or that fill the world in understanding in Christianity where there's just a lot of tutors. And we need to be spiritual fathers that say, this is how you live. This is how you change. This is how you grow. This is how you become that. Spiritual fathers live the life, not just the law. They show them how to do it. They show them this is the way you do. That's why we don't do this, because this is how you do it. See, now's the time to shine. Now's the time to make sure that you're around. Spiritual fathers need to be around. And I know we live in a society so often where they're not. There is no father at all, much less a spiritual father. But a spiritual father is someone who's around, that shows them how to do that, shows them the work ethic, shows them how to love, shows them how to treat the sisters or their mother, shows them how to do that and to take care of them. They know how to not only just reach, not only to shine and be an example, but the most important thing as well, you got to catch this. Spiritual fathers know how to produce. They know how to produce. They know how to make a difference in people's lives and change who they are. See, Paul said something that's absolutely fascinating. This is what Paul says. He said, you got to know there's not many fathers. There's a lot of tutors. But I have become a spiritual father because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I have become the spiritual father. Now, then watch what he says after this. Therefore, the there is always there for a reason. Anytime you see therefore in the Bible, the there is there for a reason. He says, therefore, when you understand, therefore, you become imitators of me. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean we got to become missionaries like Paul? We got to go be a missionary like Paul. I'm going to go out, be a missionary. Yeah, then maybe you do. Maybe God's called you to missions and you're running from it. If you are, God just confirmed that you need to be a missionary. Or maybe we go plant a bunch of churches. Maybe that's it too. That's great. Or maybe you got to be beaten 3 or 4 times on the back, like Paul. Paul wasn't meaning just become like me, become an apostle. This is what in this context, I believe this is what he was saying. There's not many fathers. I've become one. Now you imitate me. You become a spiritual father. You know what's just crazy about that? Remember who he's talking to? He's talking to the church at Corinth. And these guys were a bunch of messed up puppies, if you understand. They did things in the church that the world didn't do. They were Christians and they loved God, but they had a lot of the world still in them and such. And in that context, Paul looks at them and says, you be spiritual fathers. Now, you can imagine the first thing they would say, me? I can't do anything. Are you kidding me? I can't do that. I can't be that. I'm not good enough. I'm not spiritual enough. I don't know all the right things. I haven't got all the degrees. I can't do that. I can't do that. How can I do that? And yet, to these, Paul says, you can. And they might be saying, why? Why do I have to be your spiritual father? And Paul had already answered it. He simply said, because there's not many fathers. You can be. You can change somebody's life. You can make a difference that will change and turn everything around. By showing them, hey, come on, you can do this. That's what a spiritual father is. There will be a time when it's too late. But right now you can change. I know there's a lot of water under that bridge, but I believe God can do something in your life. And I'll be here. I'll be around. I'll be an example. I'll shine. And I will be here, and you can see my life. And I'll help you in any way I can. That's a spiritual father. And again, I'm not just talking about men. I'm talking about any of us, all of us. There's someone next to you in your world right now that doesn't have a spiritual father. They just need someone to say, I think God can change your life. I don't think you have to be that way. And I know I'm not perfect, but if you watch me, you can see that God can change your life too. Have that heart. In the Bible, there's very few stories that are in all four Gospels. That's because John is written so different. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But there's a few. And one of those is the feeding of the 5,000. And in this story, it's so profound. Because Jesus takes 5 loaves of bread and breaks them, and 2 fish and cuts them up and passes them out to probably over 20,000 people, men, women, children. Just tons of people. It was a New Testament manna moment. Because in the Old Testament, God fed them. Fed the children of Israel right in the wilderness. They didn't have food, so he just fed them. And dropped something that they call it manna, which means, what is this? So what happened is that Jesus has this moment where he takes his bread and feeds everyone. It was a manna moment. It was saying that as God provided, that Jesus Christ wasn't just a man, wasn't just a prophet, but the Son of God, God himself. But there was something absolutely fundamentally different about this manna moment compared to the Old Testament. Because in the Old Testament, there was something unique that said, you cannot take this bread, you cannot take this manna and store it up and give it for anyone else, because it will be gone the next day. It will be full of worms and maggots. You can only eat what you need now, and you can't store it up. And it was meant to teach the children of Israel to trust God. But in this moment, at this time, Jesus said, now I want you to go, disciples, and gather up all the remains. And each one of them had a basket full. Isn't that funny? What an odd coincidence. Every one of the disciples, had a basket full of broken bread and fish. And it was Jesus, I'm convinced, look at them and say, now, as I have, you go do. You be the spiritual father. You feed them with what I've given you, with what I've broken, with me itself. They didn't understand about the bread. There was argument later on. They're going, oh man, we left the bread behind. That's why he's mad. And he's saying, no, you don't get the picture. You don't understand. As I have done that, I am going to go away, but you can be here. You can be, through the power of the Holy Spirit, the spiritual father that feeds the people. The bread is in your hands. Are you willing to stand up and own it like Paul did and said, I'm going to be your spiritual father through the gospel of Jesus Christ? And say, I'm going to help. I'm going to lead. I'm going to make a difference. Do you receive the word this morning? Come on, give God thanks.